Welcome to the Bledsoe Show. This is your host, Mike Bledsoe, and today's guest is Daniel Schmachtenberger. He's an evolutionary philosopher, systems designer, and strategist. This is a special show because I bring to him some things that are on my mind that I'm working with and working through, and he helps me see things on a deeper level and unravel some truths that are within myself. He does this regularly for me. When I say regularly, I mean every few months. I seem to have some type of question that he is extremely skilled at helping me see a different perspective on, and I think he'll help you see a different perspective as well. Additionally, he is the guy who created Qualia. That's the nootropic I go on and on about all the time, and a co-founder of the Neurohacker Collective. So if you like what he has to say, you might want to try his product out too. So if you do want to do that, go to neurohacker.com and add that Qualia product to your cart. Use the coupon code Bledsoe15 and you'll get 15% off. I highly recommend just going over to the website and doing some reading, whether you're going to buy the product or not. There's a lot of really cool stuff over there beyond just nootropics. There's a lot of cool discussions that if you do dig what we talk about here, you're going to dig what they've got going on over there. Additionally, one other thing, make sure to go over to iTunes, give us 5 stars, positive comment, please. It helps this podcast reach more people. Enjoy the show. Daniel, good to have you.
Good to be here with you, my friend.
I'm looking forward to today's conversation. Every time we have a conversation, I leave feeling like I definitely having learned. And today we're going to dig into being versus doing. I think a lot of people, one of the reasons I want to bring this up is this is something I've been working on myself. And being in a culture and society where so much value is putting on what we do. And even when I'm asked, or we ask children, what do you want to be when you grow up? The answer ends up being a doing answer versus a being answer, even though the question is being. And so we get this association, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's like, oh, I want to be, and then they name the job, which is interesting. That's something that's come to my attention recently. I watch kids, oh, I'm going to be a firefighter or an astronaut. That seems like a very doing thing. Would you agree that that's just how our culture has been molding us up to this point?
Well, yeah, and it goes deeper than that. Not only is it a doing thing, it's one very specific specialist role. And it's a specialist role that is usually related to how they're going to make money. And so it's, what do you want to be when you grow up? First, it takes them out of the moment into the future. It takes them into wanting to develop who they are, right, in the framing of their essence as a job. And so you can look at how that is the effect of macroeconomics forming people to be effective cogs in that system. So there's a whole bunch of things going on, but being and doing is definitely one of them. As you're exploring that inquiry yourself, if we reframe it to something like, who do you want to be, rather than what do you want to be or what do you want to do, what comes up for you as meaningful answers to that?
I want to be honest, trustworthy. I want to be be an asset to the community, and that things like that, things more along the lines of characters, or not characters, but yeah, what's the value of my character? Am I somebody who tells the truth? Things like that.
And how does it relate for you to what that character is doing? What is the relationship of those qualities of being and doing?
It's something I can do. It's something I can be right now. It's not even something to aspire to as it is as a choice. Go, oh, I can just, if I want people to trust me, then I know that I need to behave with integrity.
So There's a number of embedded dialectics or dichotomies here. There's now versus later, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you said this is something I can be now versus something that's aspirational in the future. And there's something that is more around qualities of character versus specific types of action. Someone can show up with integrity as a artist or as an inventor or as an entrepreneur or as a mother, right? Lots of different roles. And those roles are meaningful. They are deep and meaningful to who that unique being and their expression and their dharma and their purpose is. And then there's also the difference between the qualities of character of how other people feel in relationship with them and their own quality of experience, how they experience
Mm.
life.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the fact that we have choice over our own experience and we also have choice over how we affect the experience of others, right? All of that kind of shows up here. So there's something around optimizing the relationship between all these dialectics, our own acting in ways that optimize our own experience and the experience of everyone and everything that we touch and affect, showing up right now in the fullest way we can now and in a way that optimizes our growth trajectory into the future and qualities of being and specific types of doing that are both aligned with each other and the deepest aspect of who we are.
Yeah. Um, I think it's challenging sometimes to think about what it is that I find that sometimes there's a challenge between who we are or who we want to be and who we're showing up, how we're showing up in the world for others. And I've had conversations with others, and then I've had this internal conversation with myself around, am I showing up for the purpose of, um, am I doing this? I tell myself, and I've watched other people tell themselves they're doing this because they love other people. Like, oh, I'm doing this out of love. When in reality, it's the motivation is born out of need. In that, if I am not this way, or I don't behave this way, or I don't do these things, then this person won't love and accept me. And
Mm-hmm.
so we end up in this place where I either have to behave the way other people want me to behave in order to be liked, or I do whatever I want to do and no one's going to like me. I can't do both. That seems to be um, a reality that's being created for a lot of people, and a reality I've had to wrestle with myself.
Mm-hmm. So we have more things where you have two different things that are both meaningful framed as being dichotomous, right? So
Right.
you have your individuality and your authenticity and your sovereignty on one side, which is who do I really just want to be for myself? And this is prima facie meaningful, right? Obviously meaningful. And then you have the relationship, connection, communion side, which is how do I show up in a way that is enriching to other people so that they also want to show up with me because there's so much of what's meaningful that only expresses itself interpersonally, which is obviously also meaningful. Uh, if we believe that there is an inexorable dichotomy between those where we have to sacrifice who we actually are for relationship or sacrifice relationship to be who we are, then life will suck. And it's not actually true. It is true that those are poles, but they're poles that are actually complementary and when navigated properly are symbiotic with each other. That you being who you actually are and you relating with other people in the way that creates most meaningful relationship are symbiotic. Now, you might be in a relationship with someone where they want you to behave a certain way because you kind of made that contract with them where from the beginning you acted a way that you thought that they wanted that was never true to who you were to get something from them where the whole thing is a
Right.
bullshit commodities exchange. But that just might be an unauthentic relationship to begin with.
Would you say that a lot of people have that relationship with their parents?
Sure. De facto, most people have that relationship with their parents if their parents weren't really focused on facilitating those people being who they actually authentically were, which is not most parents.
Right.
And so then they are being who they think their parents need them to be. And this is why they don't like going home for the holidays, right? Now, then one can rebel and say, I'm going to be whoever the fuck I want to be, uh, and lose connection, or they can sacrifice who they are and their authenticity in a codependent way for a connection that isn't real connection, it's pseudo connection. Or they can see what is the authentic overlap between who my parents actually are and who I actually am. What is the overlap of that Venn diagram that's authentic? And let's see how we can explore that. Let's see how we can expand it.
Yeah. What would you say to somebody who, say, grew up in I was just talking to someone earlier today who grew up in the Mormon religion, and then they leave that religion, and when we look at that Venn diagram, there's really not a lot of overlap, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe there is overlap, but it's very difficult to find. How do you go about, do we need to reconcile those relationships? Is that something that we owe other people? So we talk about being like, I live in an environment, I think you do too, where the relationships that are new are easy to get into because we're showing up as our most authentic selves more than we ever have before. And so you start the relationship without the bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
But a relationship that where you grew up with it and now, is it something worth cutting away later on in life and cutting people out, or is it something, do we owe people something?
I think there's another way to ask it that's more insightful. It's not, do we owe our parents uh, an obligatory false relationship, which is not actually very meaningful for anyone. Or on the other side, do we just cut it out? I think one meaningful question is, as we are interacting with our parents, can we feel comfortable being who we are
Mm,
without needing their approval and without needing them to understand us and agree with us? And can we let them be who they are?
mm,
And even if they can't, even if they don't have a worldview, maybe they think we're going to burn in hell or they think whatever it is, right? Can we accept them, get them where they're at, and be who we are? Or do we go into some trigger where we think we need to change who we are for them or we need to change who they are? And to the degree that that trigger arises, is there an evolutionary opportunity for us to heal that? And are they a really good mirror for showing us where those triggers live inside of us?
is it I've been in that conversation with people before too. Is like, you think you're enlightened or whatever you want to call it. Just go
Right?
hang out with your family, and they'll show you.
It's a very classic statement that
Yeah.
if people are focused on some kind of personal development, uh, one good measure is if you hang out with your parents, the degree to which you can be authentically you and at peace around them without trying to convince them of anything and let them be who they are without being triggered on who they are is a good measure for how you've come.
Yeah. That's powerful because they pretty much installed the triggers.
Yep.
So,
This is why it's such a deep mirror for the triggers,
yeah.
what they are for you,
Yeah.
which is why you disproportionately react to them in a way that nobody else does, right? Other people won't see them like, whatever, it's irritating, it's cute, it's no big deal, and you're freaking out about it is because all of your trauma, has history there. And to the degree you've healed your trauma, it's not still getting pushed.
Yeah.
And to the degree you haven't, seeing it shows you where you can work.
Yeah. So coming back to, I just want to dive into just a definition of this, which is, we talk about states of being, and and I've personally been looking at, um, you know, doing versus being, and I think a lot of us in the Western culture consider, we go, oh, if I do these things, then I'll be this person, and then we do those things, and we kind of become a piece of this person we thought we would become once we do these things, and now we have to do more things in order to feel good. Um, and I've been investigating the possibility of going straight to being, and then once you become the person that you want to be, or the person you remember the person you were before you were imprinted. Um, you become this person that is this being, and this being just does the things that they're supposed to do, or it just unfolds easily. So a lot of my focus has been around how can I be different without focusing on the doing first, and then coming from a lifetime of being taught that you do to become, and now I'm going in reverse, going, okay, I want to be different, and I need to go and can the motivation and is the motivation pure? It's like, do I want to be so that I can do? And in which case is that even possible? Or do I need to have the pure motivation of, look, I want to be for the purpose of being and being authentic, and then I need to trust in the uncertainty of what that looks like when the doing happens.
Hmm. There's a bunch of elements kind of wrapped up in there. Let's pull them apart and see if we can address them. I'd actually like to address the topic of dichotomy and paradox a little bit more centrally because it's right at the heart here of, is being really what we care about? We actually care about who we are character wise, or we care about our state of experience, right?
Hmm.
And all the doing is really just so we can be happy or good or something. And if we're there already, then how do we have any idea what we would do, and who cares, and does it matter? Or is doing really relevant because we're actually evolving the world and we have a role to play? And what is the relationship between those? And is there causal influence both ways? Does doing affect being and being affect doing? And can they be recursive? And um, so think about this very simple analogy, but the analogy is illustrative. So think about a cylinder. A cylinder is a three-dimensional object. It's a very simple three-dimensional object. We're used to thinking in three dimensions, three spatial dimensions, so it's an easy thing to think about. But if you imagine a two-dimensional creature, right, a planar creature, they can't see a cylinder. They can see a two-dimensional slice of it. Now there's an infinite number of two-dimensional slices, since they're infinitely thin, that stack on top of each other to actually make the thing up. So they're actually reducing the total information of what that is infinitely, right? One dimension of reduction is infinite
Right.
reduction. So they slice the cylinder one way and they get a circle. And it's very clear that the reality they're seeing that's kind of passing through their space is a circle. If it passed through perpendicular to that, they'd get a rectangle, right? The other kind of cross
Hmm.
section. From a two-dimensional perspective, it's like, is the cylinder a rectangle or is it a circle? Well, it's obviously whichever one is happening. Like it being a circle is true. It's very clear that from a two-dimensional perspective, like that is what is being
Mm.
seen. It's true. There's a perfect fidelity to it, right? From the other direction, as a rectangle, it's also perfectly true. And those two descriptions of reality in two dimensions cannot commensurate, right? They are disparate, mutually exclusive descriptions. A circle's this totally round thing, rectangle is these corners. And so then what are the opportunities? Well, you can either just say, I saw a circle, so I know it's circle, and the other side is just wrong.
Hmm.
That's fundamentalism, which is kind of like there's some truth and I'm sticking to it, right? And I'll fight with the people on the other side. Or you see the circle, and then for somehow you happen to be on the other plane and see the rectangle too, and you go, shit, there's seemingly truth to both of these. Now I have embraced paradox. What do I do with this? And you have different options. One way is you say, well, maybe there's a middle path, but you're still trying to reconcile it in two dimensions because you're a two-dimensional creature. So you say, well, what's kind of in the middle of a circle and a rectangle, and you get a rounded rectangle, right? You kind of round the corners of the rectangle, make it a little more circular. Now that isn't even partially true, right? Like that isn't even a little bit of any part of a cylinder. Or you just say, well, they're both true and neither are true. And we embrace paradox. And that just means you gave up on understanding, is really what it means. The truth is, a cylinder is a very straightforward thing, which is a circle translated over the space of a rectangle, or a rectangle rotated through the space of a circle. But you can't understand it in 2D. You can only understand it in 3D, which means you need an entirely higher dimensional framework of understanding to get the nature of reality. When you're trying to reduce reality to a dimensionally smaller perspective, you're fucked, right? Because
Hmm.
that dimension simply can't understand it. So then you have false paradox because the perspective, the view itself is reducing the total reality. And you can even see, just looking at the east side of a building versus the west side, you could argue over what the building looked like, and it's because perception is inherently reductive. You cannot see the whole of what something is because there's many, many different views of it, right? So you need a transperspectival understanding that can reconcile them. So the reality of the cylinder uh, is different than circle or rectangle, but both of those are partially true from that kind of perspective. Well, when we come to many existential questions that seem paradoxical or dichotomous, like being and doing, is what really matters my state of being in the moment? Or is what matters my state of becoming, and that I'm becoming more and more, right? Being side says outside of time, am I touching the infinite? Am I touching the eternal? Am I in wholeness? Am I in fullness now? Becoming side says universe itself is evolving. Am I evolving with universe? Am I adding to universe? Am I self-actualizing and realizing, right? Circle, rectangle. These are both true, but we're not just saying, well, it's both a circle and a rectangle. We actually have to put those together and say, how are they both true? How do being and becoming reconcile in that way? And the key thing to get, and we can see all the other dichotomies that come with this based on the being model. It's, well, I'm going to love and accept myself exactly how I am. I'm going to love and accept others in reality exactly how it is. I'm going to see the beauty in everything right now. On the becoming side, you're like, well, I want to make myself better. I want to help make others better. I want to make the world better.
Right.
Well, which one is it? Do I want to love what is, or do I want to make it better?
Yeah, this is exactly the struggle I've been having, and that I go through phases where I'm going through accepting, and then I'm going, you know what? I need to really step it up.
Yeah.
And there's things that need to change, and I want to see the progress and see the evolution. And then it's almost as if I get caught up in pushing the ball forward, and then uh, I feel as though my state of being there's static on the
Mm-hmm.
line, and
Mm-hmm.
then I have to go back to accepting things just as they are, and that state of being. So this is fascinating to me. Is I've been living a life where I'm switching between truths
Right.
because I can't reconcile the two,
So we can
or I have
be in
not.
a place where
Yeah.
we flip flop between truths that both are self-evidently true and yet seem unreconcilable, or we can reconcile and live them both more fully simultaneously, but we have to go higher dimensional to do that. We have to go
Right.
to a place where they can really reconcile, and that requires, and higher dimensional here isn't spatial dimensions, it's how we understand the complexity of reality. So we're going to get to it. I'd like to add another element of a model because it'll really help with this, and I think you might find it interesting. I want to compare for a minute, roughly generalized, very oversimplified, an Eastern model and a Western model of the nature of reality and meaning and um, spirituality. Obviously, it's oversimplified because there's a lot of Eastern models and a lot of Western models, and the
Right.
delineation between them isn't clear at all. But let's just take, by Eastern, I mean a kind of Vedantic Buddhist, the primary interpretations, which are very being focused. Right? And we're using these as a reference for this particular dichotomy here. So you notice in most interpretations of the Buddhist tradition, the focus is exclusively on being,
Mm-hmm.
right? Not doing, not becoming. In fact, um, be- any chop wood, carry water doing is just because if that needs done, do it. But it's all about the quality of being while doing it. It's the only thing that matters, right? The reason why, or one of the reasons why that becomes insightful is the Buddhist and the Hindu Vedantic model of time is a circular model of time, right? They have this system of time called the kalpas or the yugas, where the time and universe itself is believed to cycle through birth and death. So, if you think about it, these people watch nature very deeply, and they saw seasons, spring
Mm-hmm.
and fall, and they saw empires rise and then fall. They saw people born and then die. They saw relationships come together and come apart. And they just saw everything cycling. They watched the procession of the equinoxes. They saw cycles within cycles, days within months, within years, within galactic cycles, right? So they saw it was all cycles. And so because of that, if everything's cycling and then they extend that up to, but this is just a intellectual extension, everything in universe is just cycles, then nothing is actually going anywhere.
We're just going in circles.
There is no actual thing called progress. It's just the wheel of time, right? So they have this concept of the wheel of time.
So if you're trying to push something forward, you're just moving through the cycle more quickly.
You've bought into the illusion that you're going anywhere.
Right.
That spring means anything other than its way towards fall and death, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is why then they talk about it as Maya, right? Illusion, or even more samsara, suffering. So then if it's just this fucking illusory wheel that isn't actually going anywhere, going further is meaningless. So then
There's actually a movie, Samsara, on
Mhm.
Netflix you can watch, which is just, it's demonstrating that if you want to go see it.
that concept, right?
Right.
It's a concept.
Right.
And so then the goal there becomes getting off the wheel. And so that means getting out of time and the concept of linear time completely. So then the goal is being able to access the eternal through the now. And so the idea of becoming or of progress or making the world better when the whole thing is illusory to begin with, meaningless fundamentally to begin with, just means you bought into the illusion, you don't get the ultimate truth. So the goal there is to step out of time, to be now full, complete, in a way that doesn't have progress built in at all,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's the kind of pure zenith of a being model. You notice that happiness in that model is a model of happiness that's like contentment or serenity, like fullness right now with what is.
Right.
And in fact, anything like passion or desire or excitement is called the cause of all suffering.
Right.
Because that means that you believe something good is in the future. So you sacrifice being in the moment for wanting something in the future. And that just leads you to getting all feverish and fucked up. And then when you get it, you aren't even that happy and you want something else. And then you're anxious of losing it. So just don't desire anything. Don't have passion for
Right.
anything. Just be full and content now.
Right. Yeah. This is also, this is great because this is also something I've been studying. Like how do I be, and then and then also it's hard to not believe that my passion and my drive and my desires are for nothing.
Well, in that model, they are for nothing that isn't illusory and stupid, right?
Right.
They are for plenty of sound and fury leading to suffering and nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's that model. But that is circle, right? That it's kind of true, but it's so far from true that it's just actually infinitely off.
Okay.
So far from the whole truth. It's a dimensional reduction. So then let's look at the Western model
I'll say
for a
one
minute.
thing. It sounds boring.
It can sound boring, but of course, then the idea of boring in that model would be a mental trap.
Right.
And that when you come into the fullness of being right now, you can access, and this is true, a state of serenity that has a kind of blissfulness to it that doesn't need you to do anything and that is unperturbable. So they'd be like, no, you actually don't get what the fullness of being when you drop into it is.
Yeah.
Right? That is eternal and it's unfuckwithable. So that's that. Now, the Western model of time, kind of originating with Judaism, we can say, and then the Greeks and modern science and, up till most of the world now. Because early Jews were very focused on history and noticing their kind of progression as a people, new technology as it emerged and new law and new ideas and etc. They they were recording that, they were actually noticing net change over time and that new things were emerging that didn't exist before. And so rather than focusing on the cycles and in nature and seeing everything as cyclic, they were focused on the emergence of things humans were creating that were additive and actually going somewhere. And so they had a linear model of time. So time was actually going somewhere. And so that led to a dialectic of progress and a focus on becoming more than being.
And in that model, there a what I've seen is there's a beginning and an end.
Maybe or maybe not. Sometimes there is a beginning and an end, and maybe the beginning is the beginning of universe in Genesis. Maybe the
Mhm.
beginning is when you were born. Maybe the end is heaven, right? There's different kind of
Right.
theologic models. But they can disagree about where the beginning and the end is. They can even have a reincarnation model within it, but that there is net progress along the whole thing, right? Because universe itself is actually going somewhere. And so
Mhm.
you're going somewhere within it and you're adding to universe going somewhere. Well, if you think universe is actually going somewhere, then adding to universe going somewhere is inherently meaningful.
Right.
And you being part of where it's going is inherently meaningful. So then just being in the moment is not that interesting. Becoming ever more in a universe that is itself becoming ever more. So developing oneself, right? In which case being just completely content in a way that has no drive is antithetical to what's purposeful. So you notice their definition of happiness has a lot more that sounds like passion and excitement, right?
Right.
And
Which
for
if you were to look at those cultures, there's a lot of singing, dancing,
yeah,
even partying. Whereas you look at some of the more Eastern philosophies, and things very quiet, and I guess the traditions are that I'm imagining right now, like a tea ceremony. It's
yeah.
it's very calm, not a lot of excitement, very bland or vanilla.
Well, you're giving a Western bias here. So you're calling it boring and bland and vanilla.
Sure.
They would say uh, profoundly serene.
Am I insulting people that come from that perspective, you think?
Well, probably, but what's more interesting is that you're not getting it yet, right? Because you haven't dropped into that place of getting it, but you probably have if you think about it. You might have had moments where you're surfing and you stop and everything kind of stops and you
Mhm.
just see sparkles on the water
Mhm.
and thinking about what's coming next stops and the moment's full.
Mhm.
And it's more full in a certain quality than excitement about the future is,
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I've definitely had moments
right?
staying there
So the whole
would s-
Eastern process
would
would
be
be
stay
staying
there.
there, right? Each moment being fully with that.
Need the endless wave.
Except it doesn't it's about it independent of circumstance.
Right. You're in the eye of the storm. No matter what's happening around you, you keep your peace.
Yeah, a part of the enlightenment in that model is being able to be fully with what is, no matter what is, no matter what is happening, because everything that's happening is an illusion, right? It's
Mm.
all just changing and flexing, but the consciousness that's witnessing it is ever present and identifying as that, and that is actually the fullness, right? That the light is actually the light of consciousness. That's what waking up means there. Now, so if one wanted to bias from that direction, they could look at the other thing with all the singing and dancing and say, look how feverish it is.
Mm.
Look at how kind of immature in its excitement when things go well and disappointment when things don't go well. Look at how little sovereignty the people have, where they're so affected by their environment and their circumstance. Look at how they rush around trying to change their circumstance to make themselves happy. Look at how attached they get to other people and how fucked up they get when things don't go the way they want. Look at how unhappy they are when they lose something. Look at how when they get what they want, they're only happy for like 15 minutes and then they want something else.
Mhm.
And that there's like almost nothing of seeming enduring depth there.
Right.
Now, these are both true, right? So we're talking about circles and rectangles. So to just finish a little bit on the Western model. So time is going somewhere, dialectic of progress. So the focus becomes purpose, because purpose is a time-bound concept. Purpose unfolds in time, right? Uh, and evolution is a time-bound concept. And so evolving ourselves, evolving others, evolving the world around us, becoming more, being able to express more of infinite potential through the finite, through time, where and in that model it would say, well, of course when you get what you wanted, you aren't just enduringly happy, because then you would stop becoming. The goal is to be becoming forever.
Mhm.
The goal is actually to be in the process of blossoming. At the depth, what universe is, the evolutionary impulse that brings subatomic particles together into particles and particles into, higher order particles into biology, the whole thing from the Big Bang on, that what keeps organizing universe towards more orderly complexity is a becoming impulse, an infinite blossoming into higher order potential of universe, and that you resulted from that, and you also have the ability to choose in a way that aligns yourself with that. And so, of course, when you get something, then you're happy for a moment because you're in the becoming, but it's actually the being in the becoming that's what's interesting,
Mm.
right? What Teilhard de Chardin called the lure of becoming. But because it's about becoming, it's also every moment, right? And so there, it's more about excitement, passion, uh, you know, associated with becoming. Now, what's interesting when you put these together, you have a circular model of time and a linear model. Corresponding with the circular is being, with the linear is becoming. With the circular is presence, with the linear is purpose. With the circular is contentment, serenity, and the fullness of the now. And with the linear is passion and purpose and the promise of possibility. You notice that the circular model maps to serotonin like happiness and the serotonergic systems, right? And that the linear model maps to dopamine, right? And the dopamine kinds of um, happiness like processing. And that the
I'm so glad
practices,
you're tying this to the neurotransmitters. This brings so much application, and
right?
if anyone knows anything about how those things are impact, or if you've had experiences where you had an excess in dopamine or serotonin,
Right.
then it's like, oh, that's why those experiences were that
So
way.
people have
Interesting.
people who've explored it might resonate with they took a serotoninergic thing, right? They took MDMA and they became very in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
very sensory, very feeling, very in the fullness of everything being overwhelmingly beautiful now.
Yeah.
Almost no awareness of other than now,
Well,
right? Someone took dopaminergic thing, right? They took Adderall or cocaine or whatever, and they became profoundly focused on what they wanted to create. And all they wanted to do was be in the process of creating it.
right.
And we can see the beauty and the crashes of both of those and what becomes more available and less available in both of those. We can see then the practices, right? A lot of the Eastern practices are serotoninergic practices, being in the moment, breathing slow, being in nature, having all of your awareness, your sensory awareness in what is, right? A lot of the Western practices are create goals, achieve the goals, feel good that you achieved them, check them off, reinforce having goals, create more goals, check, right? And those are dopaminergic practices. Now, if we come back to our 2D,
I'm
3D
addicted to
analogy,
dopamine.
dopamine is addiction,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
Dopamine and its relationship with opioids, the dopamine opioid system is feels good, do it again. Because it is time bound what things were evolutionarily relevant to do again, right? Nobody's in terms of addicted to serotonin. If you're having an experience that is more about being in the moment, you're not jonesing for the next moment, right?
That would explain why people tend to get hooked on something like cocaine, and maybe MDMA is not as addictive.
Right. Now, someone might have a serotonin imbalance, so they're going to keep wanting to go back to some serotoninergic thing. There's
Mm-hmm.
obviously all
Oh, for
SSRIs are
sure.
focused on that, but it is all addiction relates to the dopamine axis.
Mm.
Other things are involved, but it will always involve that.
Okay.
Now, come back to our 3D, 2D analogy with the cylinder, but let's look at their models of time here, and the circle and the circular model of time, linear model of time. And if we embed those on each other in a higher dimension, because those are both one dimensional, right? One dimension curved back on itself like a circle, or one dimension, of time that just continues straight. If you bring them together, you get a spiral of time,
Mm.
right? Which is a circle that isn't closing on itself. It's a circle that is actually moving along a line. So then you say, are there cycles? Yes, there are cycles. And there is net change from one cycle to the next. Now, why this is meaningful is we look at the ecosystem and we see that you've got spring and fall and spring and fall and things are born and die. But over the course of deep time, You look at the fossil record, there's evolution of new organisms that weren't there before. So there is net change over time while there are cycles in how that occurs. It's important to understand that there are cycles because that means that in how you proceed in becoming, you need to have phases of activity and phases of rest, phases of going outward and phases of coming inward,
Mm.
phases of learning new things and then phases of applying that learning, phases of learning new things, phases of digesting and taking that to process with everything else you know. If you don't understand that there are cycles, every time it's time to come inward or to digest or to learn something new or to step back, you'll feel like you're not making progress.
Mm.
But the key is that
I know this feeling. Yeah.
or you'll never want to sleep, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Those
I've gone through phases where I'm pushing, 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 and then crash. And
right
it looked, in hearing this, I could have been more sensitive
to
to
the
the
fact that it has to cycle in that way.
right,
So you don't have to push and then crash where the cycle forces itself on you. You can
right.
go with it and you actually you optimize yourself over time.
Mm.
Now, at the same time, you realize that within that cycle, net growth is happening. So you might come back to,
It's interesting how I can see this in some aspects of my life, but then I completely neglect them in others.
right?
Right.
Well, now the areas you've neglected them in, you can start looking at and saying, where am I pushing? Where it is inexorable that there is a cycle that if I give space to it, I'll actually go further faster.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll enjoy the process more. My being and my becoming will both evolve.
Yeah.
So now we put this together, right? And if we have a model of time in which cycles happen, but net growth also happens, then and we start to synthesize, to reconcile all the elements of both of those, do we want to be unconditionally able to access fullness and contentment now? Yes. Do we want to be able to access creative desire and passion about the future? Yes. Do we want to be excited about making something happen and not devastated if it doesn't happen? Yes, both at the same time, right? Do we want to be uh, optimizing our dopaminergic circuits or our serotoninergic circuits? Yes, both, right? The fullness of the human experience. And so we can see how different cultures were pioneering the insights that now we can synthesize, right? They were pioneering how to really bring those insights and practices about, where now, as a global people that can harvest the wisdom from all these cultures, bring them
Yeah.
together, we can really start to synthesize how do we be in the moment fully and be becoming fully. And so the fullness of the human experience is both. And if we look at it like this, so here's someone, and I want to love them unconditionally the way they are right now. I also want to help them grow. Which one do I do? Do I go back and forth between them? When I really get it, I realize that they're the exact same thing. The cylinder is actually one thing. It isn't a bunch of circles stacked up as one thing, right?
Yeah.
If I love them the way they are completely, the way they are is not actually a static thing. They are a verb, right? They are different than they were yesterday. They will be different tomorrow. There's a sameness, but there's a becoming that is part of their being. And because there is an impulse in them to express who they are more and more fully, to self actualize, to self realize, to add to universe, to realize the depths of what's possible for them. Loving them for who they are is wanting for them, is wanting for their fullest expression, is also helping them become that. So loving them unconditionally the way they are and supporting them to be what they're becoming are the same fucking thing. When you actually get that those aren't dichotomous at all. That built within the being is verbness.
This is extremely helpful. And then I as you're talking about this, I'm visualizing a couple different relationships I have where in the past I had a hard had a hard time accepting people where they were at
Mm-hmm.
and then wanting more for them. But the simple fact that I wasn't accepting them for where they were at in that moment and who they were becoming, like, potentially stunted that or it harmed the relationship in the least.
Yeah.
In which case, there was no way for me to be support.
Think about this. You were born in a particular place to a particular family. You didn't really have much choice in that. not going to get into if there was a spirit that did or whatever. You, as you understand yourself, didn't have much choice in that. Had you been born somewhere else, right? Had you been even given up for adoption as an infant, and had you grown up with the Machiganga tribe in the Amazon, or had you grown up with the Sioux Indians, or had you grown up on the Upper East Side Manhattan with a banking family, or almost every part of your identity would be different.
Mm-hmm.
Your aesthetics, what you like, what you don't like, the language that you think in and perceive the world in, your everything, right?
Yeah.
So much of what you think is you is other people. It's other people that condition that in you. And so when you are, and this is true of everyone else too. So when you're interacting with someone and there's something, they're dealing with some jealousy or laziness or pettiness or anger or whatever it is, it's not them. It's a part of the reality that they are dealing with and being, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not essentially them. That's what they were conditioned into. Now, what you'll notice is the person's dealing with that jealousy, but they're like, I really want to shed this jealousy and just love unconditionally. Why do they even want that? If who they really were was just jealous, they'd just be stoked with it. Like, yeah, I'm just jealous. Fuck, I'd like to be more jealous, right? Like
Mm.
it is essentially something I value. But no, they're like, no, I want to love more unconditionally. I don't want to be angry. I actually want to be a kinder person. Where does that want come from? Even deeper than where it was conditioned as a moral or a value. Even when you strip those away, there are deep impulses that connect to the deepest parts of the being of who they actually are. And so, what someone is wanting, even if they don't know how to access it, is deeper to the truth of who they are than what they're working through and stuck with. So, when you really love someone, you're not you're not looking at all the conditioning bullshit that was put on them and in them. You're
Mm-hmm.
looking at what is trying to express itself through that and saying, "Wow, I actually see underneath all of the trauma and fear and conditioning and nonsense. I actually see the being that you
Yeah.
are, and I love the shit out of it." And that being is actually totally beautiful and totally unique. And in unconditionally loving that and accepting that it's dealing with the shit that it has to deal with, I want to help it deal with it. I want to help it express who it really is more.
This this reminds me of I I like to think I create almost like workarounds when I recognize something, and a workaround I came up with I'm now recognizing as a workaround potentially, and then you can tell me what you think about it, which is when if I'm getting upset with somebody or somebody's getting upset with me, the way I've been framing it in my mind is their story is upset with my story. Like who they are is not really upset with who I am. They love, if they were seeing me just for who I was or who I am and I'm seeing them for who they are, then I would just love them. It's
Mm-hmm.
the stories
Mm-hmm.
that are in the way. Would that be accurate, or do you think that's a workaround?
Yeah. So let me say it another way. Um, Marshall Rosenberg, the developer of the nonviolent communication system, had a good way of saying this point. Said, our fundamental needs and our fundamental values always work together. Sometimes our strategies for how we go about acting on those values or meeting those needs don't work together. And sometimes we get very attached to those strategies and don't even make a distinction, right?
Mm.
So there's a couple, and one of them is having, uh, they're fighting about, like, you never go places and go to parties with me, and you never give me fucking space, and like they're in that dialogue, and it, and one of them is really wanting the other person to go interact with their friends, and the other one is really wanting to be by themselves, and it seems like they are unreconcilable things that they want. And there's a million versions of this, right? But underneath it, one person is usually wanting more, their actual need or values around connection. And the
Mm-hmm.
truth is both people value connection.
Mm-hmm.
And the other person might be valuing sovereignty, or individuality, freedom. Both people actually value freedom.
Right.
And so when you get to what is actually the essential value that I have here, you'll realize we actually share this. And you're like, oh shit, I want you to have freedom. I want to have freedom too. Oh,
Yeah.
I want you to have connection. I want to have that too. Then you say, if we stopped being focused on I can only have connection if you do this thing with me this way, which might be something you actually hate, but there's plenty of other things you might like to do that we could connect on.
And that's the strategy.
That's the strategy. Or I can only have freedom if I don't do this thing and I do this other thing. And right, maybe I can have the freedom to choose to do that rather than feel forced into it, knowing that I'm choosing it, right?
Yeah.
So if you let go of the strategies and you come to the needs, you say, is there ever a time where those needs don't work together? No, they always work together. Or those values always work together. So then to the degree we can actually chill out on the strategies and say, is there a strategy that meets all the needs, that fulfills all the values simultaneously? There always will be.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is another place of like getting past a false dichotomy. It seems like these are unreconcilable, but when you can step to a higher level, right, the level of values, not strategy, they are reconcilable.
With this perspective, I imagine people are thinking, then what's there's nothing stopping us from loving each other fully. Why do we prefer some people over others, and who we connect with?
Mm-hmm. It's a very deep question. Why do we, or why should we continue to, as we evolve, are very different.
Oh.
We do historically for a bunch of mostly unconscious and not really great reasons, right? We prefer some people because they're the color that we're used to,
Mm-hmm.
or because they're wealthy, or because they're hot, or because they're
Mostly the
like
hot one.
that
No.
one. That one is there, right? That's where your biology programmed you.
I was going to ask about that. How much of that is biology, and how much of that is culture as
Both.
well? Because there's definitely, our you look at what a model looked like 50 years ago to even now, there's a
Right.
difference.
And what different cultures find beautiful, there are differences. There's also similarities. The similarities are evolutionary biology and that relate to fertility, right? Signs of fertility. And the differences are culture. But the point is, those are both conditioned. Now, you relate with those, but how many people are there that I could find really hot from an evolutionary biology point of view that would be absolutely terrible matches for me? Most of them, right? Like, it's not hard to go to a gym or go to a beach and see a bunch of guys or girls that are hot. Like,
Definitely.
and yet you might have almost exactly opposite core worldviews, values,
Mm.
ideals, beliefs. You might be very symbiotic with supporting each other on a path or not. And so it's not that that is a completely meaningless metric, but it's a metric that's important to um, make sure does not override your assessment of all the other metrics. And especially if you are thinking about enduring relationship, it that metric will fade, period. It will fade because aging will change aesthetics, and it will fade because even before aging changes aesthetics, chemistry wears off as soon as it's no longer new and novel. And if you think of it from an evolutionary biology point of view, there's a lot of evolutionary advantage to staying together long enough to make sure that offspring happens. And then there's a lot of evolutionary advantage to have more offspring in more places so that some of them will get through, right?
Yeah.
And so that looks like serial monogamy, right? That
Mm-hmm.
looks like fall in love and then fall out of love, fall in love somewhere else. It's not falling in love, it's falling in biochemical procreation patterns and then rationalizing a lot of love that is all really nonsense.
Mm.
Um, so, so realizing that that is going to fade, then you say, all right, how controlled by that do I want to be versus how much do I want to create something enduring? What is an enduring basis of relationship? And this is going to be now this comes to being and becoming again. Our beings need to connect and our becomings need to connect. if we're going to have a relationship that's enduring, who they are becoming and who I am becoming actually need to connect, so that as time goes
Mm.
on, we are on deeper and deeper paths. So you see a lot of people, it's like their vectors are crossing. So for a while, they're coming closer together, and then they cross, and then they start going further apart. And to stay together, they actually someone has to pull the other one off their path,
Mm.
or they go further apart. There are other people where it's almost like two converging vectors, right? Like they're asymptotically converging towards
Yeah.
each other. And this is why part of a good fit is not just does our lifestyle fit, do our way of being now fit, do our chemistries fit, but it's actually do our deepest aspirations and our basis for choice and our visions of the future fit, which is this is super meaningful, right?
Very.
And
This is something that people, I imagine, are exploring superficially.
mhm. And it might be superficially like, do you want kids? Yeah, I want kids. Or are you going to
Right.
make enough money? Yeah, okay, cool, we can do this. But as it goes much deeper, it's one of the metrics of a healthy relationship is that your becoming path, right? As you are evolving your becoming path, that you are evolving better because of being in that relationship
Mm.
than you would being out of it, right? Or being in some other one that was less good of a fit in that way. And so, who you are actually being who you essentially are more fully because of their influence in your life. This doesn't mean that you're codependently depending on them for it, but it means they are an enhancement to the degree they're influencing you of your own being and your own becoming, and you are for them. Oftentimes, we'll have relationships that are more about addiction than love, where I'm actually being less of who I really want to be, and I'm becoming less. Right? I'm less available to my friends and family because I'm absorbed as fuck in the relationship. I'm doing my work and my dharma and my creativity and my art and my et cetera and my practices less, but I really, really fucking like them. Right? And and what you notice is my relationship to them is a lot more like a relationship to cocaine or heroin than a relationship to an evolutionary path, right? It's more about I like the hit I'm getting from them and my life is getting worse because of it, rather than I am actually evolving in who I essentially am. One of the key criteria is with an addiction, you become less able to enjoy anything else other than the addiction, right? This if you're addicted to Coke, when you're coming down off Coke, the sunset's not beautiful, right? Flowers
Mm.
don't smoke. Only getting some more Coke is the only thing, right?
Mm.
And if you don't get the Coke, fuck everything else. And so you're focused on pleasure, but it's becoming more and more and more focused on one source. Um, as one is moving in their actual enlightenment, right? Their being direction, right? The eastern side of this is their ability to love everything more, to get connection, pleasure with everything more. And as they're evolving and they're becoming, they have ability to contribute to everything more, and that their being is evolving through their becoming, right? They're actually
Mhm.
evolving, which is a becoming thing in their being. And so if I have a relationship that's like cocaine, what it means is if they aren't calling me back, they aren't texting me back, I can't think about anything else. I can't chill out, I can't enjoy, I'm fucked up, right? Life's meaningless. But when I get the hit, everything's great.
Mm.
That's addiction, not love. If it's actually a meaningful evolutionary relationship, my ability to show up to everything else in my life increases because of them. My ability to love and appreciate everything else increases because of them. I become a better friend because I'm learning how to communicate better from them. I start loving and appreciating other people more because my heart's opening more.
How long? Um, I didn't think we'd get into dating on this, but I uh, I find myself people asking me for advice about it, and I think I've given good advice in the past for sure. But this is actually really helpful for me, and even being able to see what it is that I have in my own relationship, and being able to direct others into finding something similar. Um, how long does it take to identify for somebody to go? This is an addiction, or and because we're really good at tricking ourselves, and this doesn't just apply to relationships, but we may take a job, or we make a lot of choices, and well, technically everything in our life is a relationship. You know, we take a job where we're we're doing a thing in relationship with other people because everyone in the company is a relationship, and business is just a series of relationships. So at what point are we? How long does it take for someone to spot this is,
Right.
an addiction versus, growth?
Well, you can actually notice the vector shift in the moment. Right? You can actually notice the quality of being in the moment. So, am I relating to this thing in a way where my presence to the rest of life is decreasing,
Mm.
or my presence to the rest of life is increasing? I'm doing a bodybuilding competition, and all I can think about is the bodybuilding competition. And if I lose, everything sucks in life. And I actually don't really love the people in front of me actively. And that might be an effective mindset to take to be obsessed about doing the bodybuilding thing. But here's your question: does doing create being? Will you actually be meaningfully happy with who you are at the end if you win? No. Because on the becoming side, right? Okay, so I became buff, but then that's just going to, it's becoming forever. So then I'm not happy because it was only Mr. World and I need to win Mr. Universe or whatever. So then it'll lead to more becoming. It'll never lead to being in that way, unless the things I'm working on becoming are related to my being, right? I'm actually
Mhm.
evolving in my presence, my character, and so one of the key things is, am I even evolving the right things? Am I even focused on the evolution of the right things, or do I have a wrong causation belief? I have the belief that this strategy is how I will then be happy, and so I'm trying to pursue happiness through how much money or how buff I get or something that is actually a wrong causal strategy. No amount, like, yes, I might get richer. Yes, I might get buffer. No, I won't get happier, because that actually isn't related to a mechanic of happiness, right? And the happiness is actually accessible now. So then, do I still have a reason to get buff, or do I realize that was actually just nonsense? Maybe I do still have a reason to be buff, but it might be a different one.
Yeah.
So your question around when do you notice? So kind of all the time you can notice. Do I feel like my I am being more of who I really want to be? Your question. And am I becoming more of who I want to be because of the way I'm showing up in this relationship, in this job, in this activity? And if not, if I'm being less of or becoming less of what I really most value, switch something.
Yeah, it's a sounds like a checking in process.
Hmm.
And I think that's something that um, we might want to look into doing more. Is how often are we checking in, reflecting on what's going on?
Well, this is what mindfulness means, is that can become continuous. There can be a continuous noticing, so there can be real-time correction. Because especially as one gets more powerful, they're moving faster, then when they get a little bit off, if they don't check in as fast, they can get much further off of what really matters
Right.
quickly.
So there's a good argument for the mindfulness practice.
And
Is
it's
it?
an argument for why it's more important the more powerful you get.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the faster you're going, the more steering matters.
I've noticed that.
Hmm.
Um, what what are your favorite mindfulness practices, or what is your preferred method of improving mindfulness?
It's a huge topic, right? Mindfulness basically means noticing. What are you noticing? So I can be mindful of my breath. And so I'm noticing my breath, and in the process noticing my body, realizing, oh, I wasn't actually breathing very much, or there's tightness or pain in my body I haven't been paying attention to, or there's a lot of anxiety I wasn't paying attention to. What do I want to do about that, right? That might help you feel a lot better in your body, might help you change things you need to change, might help you live longer, right? Because you notice something and you tend to it. So there's body-based mindfulness. There's noticing your thoughts and noticing how many of your thoughts are fundamentally in a positive, empowering direction, and how many of them are basically have no meaningful utility, right? Like they are negative, but not negative in a constructive way.
Hmm.
And then as soon as you notice that, when you don't notice it, you really have no choice because it's just an automated program running itself out that you didn't choose. The moment you notice it, choice enters.
Mm.
The possibility for choice enters. You can say, well, do those thoughts affect how I feel? Yes. Do they affect how I perceive? Yes. Do they affect how I act? Yes. So how do I want to shift the thoughts so that I perceive and act and feel differently? You can notice your emotions similarly and say, oh, when I notice I'm feeling angry or agitated, etc., then I want to actually stop and see what I can do to shift my state and recenter, because if I'm acting from that state, that's going to be subtly affecting how I perceive and how I behave. And there's a lot of things you can notice. You can notice, like we're talking about here, being in relationship and your own sense of being on path and being in relationship and how those relate to each other. So there's a lot of good mindfulness practices for various aspects of it. And they cross apply, right? Just increasing awareness is valuable. But I would say a very deep one is if someone takes some time to write around being, like you were saying, I want to be a person that invokes people's trust and is worthy of it. I want to be a person who has character that leads to me being a support and a pillar for the community, not because I asked to be, but because people just recognize that I show up in a way that supports people. So you kind of look, who do I really want to be?
Mm.
And then how do I most want to become? What do I most want to do? What are the things I really want to contribute to? And you mind this, and then you ask why on all these things, and then you say, how much of that is still because of some unconscious shit that my parents taught me? How much of it is still because I'm insecure and don't think I'm enough, and this is my compensation strategy? And then you see, can I let that go? And then what do I actually want underneath that? And you get deeper and deeper of what do I really value? And then you're mindful of, is what I'm doing right now, is what I'm thinking right now, is the state I'm in right now aligned with what I most deeply value? And if so, great. And if not, shift.
Simplicity.
Mhm.
I think that's it's probably one of the, not probably. I think that's the best explanation around mindfulness and the argument for why you might pick up a meditation practice, which is a practice of noticing. What um this is not, yeah, this is not an intentional plug even, but the supplement Qualia, which you created,
Mhm.
I've been taking it for a year. I've noticed that it has helped create an expanded awareness for myself, and then I would say my wife even like
Mhm.
what she's reported has been much more dramatic even. Um, so that there's is taking a supplement like that, adding if you're not having that mindfulness practice and you're just taking it unconsciously, are you gonna fire the rocket in the wrong direction?
Could.
Yeah.
Um, we've had many people describe uh, being on qualia and uh, finding that the effect it had on neurochemistry getting more balanced for them actually helped them get clear where they weren't before, because it helped shift their state. And so as they were shifting out of agitation or anger or depression or whatever into more centered, empowered states. None of these are medical claims, make no medical claims, but this is
Sure.
what people reported, some of their experience, that it led to them being able to hold clarity more and, et cetera.
Yep.
Many people who,
Because there's things for the body's endocrine system to balance it out, so you're less likely to get swayed by triggers.
uh,
Or
so
or maybe we shouldn't get. Can you make these types of comments? I guess.
let me finish where I was, and I'll come
Sure.
back to
Sorry
explaining
about
the
that. Yep.
mechanism because it's all relevant. So other people have described that when they feel on, right, they feel generally centered, they take qualia, they feel a lot better. They feel
Mhm.
like they have more power nitrous running through the system. When they are off, they're angry, they're agitated, whatever, they take qualia, then they feel more empowered, but they're not directing it in a way, right? Like
Mm.
they're not directing their thoughts very sovereignly, and so now they actually feel kind of more of that going on. So
Mm.
for most people, it has been supportive for them coming to center if they are not. But for some people, the order of operations is such that more centering would be more software side would be relevant first, or at least in conjunction with the way you think about it, and relate it back to like what would a supplement have to do with anything that we're talking about. If you think of the brain and the associated rest of the physiology as the hardware, right, the bio hardware
Mm-hmm.
that the kind of software of thought and emotion is running on, except that the division between hardware and software in computers is a hard one, right? The
Right.
software is not affecting the hardware. The hardware has to be adequate to the software to run on it. In us, every time you change the physiology, it automatically changes the predispositions for thinking and feeling. And every time you have a thought or a feeling, it is actually an electrochemical process that is then changing physiology. So it's all kind of firmware that's interaffecting each other.
Yeah. It's
But
not fair to think about it as a typical computer.
it's not that distinct. But it
Yeah.
is a fine starting place to say that most of what we call psychology is on the software side of
Mm-hmm.
the gradient. It's a
Mm-hmm.
gradient rather than a hard binary.
Right.
And so the psychology is looking at what do you focus on, what meaning do you make from things, etc. So mindfulness also would fit in there. That most medicine and biohacking, neurohacking, biophysical optimization is focused on the hardware side of things. But these automatically interaffect each other because everyone has experienced having their body out of balance, having a headache or their hormones are out or a hangover or whatever, where your physiology affects your psyche,
No
right?
doubt.
And you're angry or you're depressed or you're whatever because of a physiologic process. People have also noticed when their physiology feels great, say they recover from a sickness, now they feel good in their body again, how that automatically affects their psyche, right? We also have noticed where you get really stressed out psychologically and you get sick, right? Or you feel great psychologically and you feel increased energy. So you can see that there's this psychoneural interface where body and mind bidirectionally interaffect each other. So the optimal process is to pull the levers one can in both simultaneously, leading to virtuous feedback loops and upcycling. So, how do I work with my focus to focus on empowering things? How do I work with my meaning to create empowering meaning to that which I'm focusing on? How do I work with my just energetic state through uh, visualization, through breath, through subtle kinds of movements, etc.? How do I work with my body through chemistry, health, diet, fitness,
Mm-hmm.
supplementation? Where each of these lead to a system that is upregulating, interaffecting all the other aspects. So qualia is something that the first product that we designed at Neurohacker Collective to help upregulate certain aspects of neurochemistry and neurophysiology so that the hardware that is mediating thought and emotion is both more in tune, right, more balanced, and moving towards more net capacity through things like neurogenesis, development of more neurons, development of more synapses, more actual computational capability. And the reason why we developed that and all the other products that we're in process of developing on the hardware side is the goal of Neurohacker Collective is actually evolving sovereignty, right?
Mm.
Helping evolve the collective sovereignty of humanity. And we define sovereignty as as the relationship between three different vectors. And so imagine three vectors, x, y, z axis perpendicular to each other. One is intelligence, one is agency, one is sentience. So intelligence is our ability to understand things, our ability to understand dichotomous things together and how to optimize for both of them, and right, our ability to think critically, to think systemically, to have a total body of knowledge that's meaningful, memory intelligence, right? Agency is our ability to and disposition to make choices, our follow through, our responsibility, our drive, our resilience, are all the things that move us in universe. And our sentience is actually our depth of feeling and our feelings of ourself, our feeling of whether we really are in tune or not, our depth of being, right? Presence, connection with uh, life in the moment and others, our empathy and our ability to feel other people. So you can actually see how agency very much relates to becoming. And uh, being and sentience are very related. And the intelligence can help reconcile the relationships between those. So if you think about evolving sentience, right? Evolving sentience fully starts to look like bodhisattva, right? It looks like the embodiment of deep compassion, embodied awareness, etc. Evolving intelligence looks like polymath, right? Like full genius across multiple spectrum. Evolving agency looks like power, the ability to have more power to actually create in reality. Fully empowered bodhisattva polymaths, we believe, will be the new normal in the future and have to be the new normal in the future because the scope of issues that the world is facing actually require people who are fully caring for the whole, have profound capabilities, complex thinking, problem solving capabilities, and a profound amount of agency to actually take care of a lot of shit. Right.
Yeah.
And so we define all of those together, the volume of the sphere defined by the shortest of those vectors, as kind of proportional, semi proportional roughly to one sovereignty. And so what we're talking about here is you can also think of then that being and becoming are both parts of defining the sphere of what matters, right? And the relationship between them, being, becoming, and the relationship between how we navigate those. Yep.
I'm gonna have to go back and listen to this show. It's been, uh, I'm not sure I have anything left to ask. I definitely want to have you back on for another round. Is there anything that you want to mention or something I didn't ask that I should have asked? I run into this a lot of times when I'm talking to somebody who knows a lot more about what they're talking about than I do, and there's always, what question did I not ask that maybe I should have?
There's a very meaningful application of this dichotomy and looking at the world situation in the moment, which is everything really fucked up? Or is everything actually mm, perfect, right? And everything tending to itself. Mm, and it's both and neither, but it's actually, again, the cylinder isn't just both and neither, circle, rectangle. There's a deeper way of understanding what that means. We can look at how all the exponential technology, your phone has the computational capability of supercomputers not that long ago. We can look at all of the places where technology is giving us the capability of building better technology faster that is enriching certain aspects of the quality of people's lives. And when there are tremendous metrics around how everything's getting better. At the same time, there's all these metrics regarding biodiversity loss and ocean acidification
Yeah.
and overarching environmental metrics problems and war that's empowered by more and more uh, powerful technology and where everything's getting worse. And you can cherry pick the data on either side you want.
No
But if you
doubt.
look at big enough data sets, things are getting exponentially worse and exponentially better at the same time.
Mm.
You say, well, what does that mean if things are getting exponentially better and exponentially worse? Because obviously neither of those are the trajectory to project where we're going. What it means is the current system is destabilizing, right?
Mm.
Things are moving further and further away from a center line. The system's destabilizing because we have a world system overarchingly that is coming to the end of its life cycle, to the end of its phase, where we've had a world system that had exponentially increasing population with exponentially increasing resource per capita, all based on extracting more and more stuff, exponentially more stuff
Mm.
from the earth each year and turning it into trash. How long can you run a linear materials economy where you take stuff out of the earth unrenewably faster than it regenerates and then turn it into trash, put it back in the earth on a finite planet, with an exponential rate of you can't run it that long, and we basically are at the end.
Yeah.
So, and yet that system has given the technologies and tools that are necessary to build the next system.
Right.
And so we're at this very interesting place where what is necessary for the emergence of a new world that is at a radically higher quality of life possible for everyone than has been possible so far is emerging. But it will be a fundamental redesign of everything, of economics, of governance, of infrastructure, of worldview. We're also at a place where the current world, it really is ending and having to change. And so then
It feels antiquated. And
it,
I'm not sure if it's a generational thing. I don't know if every generation feels this.
well, no, this is not just generational. There's generational stuff, but there's since the plow, we started
Yeah.
removing stuff from Earth faster than we were regenerating it. And since the Industrial Revolution, exponentially faster, and we're actually talking about the end of a phase that started then.
So it's not that long.
Well, not that long in evolutionary terms.
Right.
The entirety of what we call recorded history. Um,
Yeah, but considering
so from evolutionary, not long.
Yeah.
From human awareness of our own history standpoint, the whole of what we've had so far is a phase coming to an end, which has been a phase defined by finite games, zero-sum games, finite amount of resources, and the total number of us are growing, and we're competing for those finite resources. And if you have them, I don't. If I have them, you don't. And so our answer is pull the resources out of nature faster and compete with each other harder. And now our tools of competition, our tools of warfare are big enough to destroy the entire planet, and our ability to pull the resources out is enough that it can also destroy the whole planet. So we've outgrown the playing field. And so that game is coming to an end. So either we end with that game or we create a new game. And the new game will be an infinite game, not a finite game. It'll be a positive sum, not a zero sum. And it'll be one where fundamentally our ability to thrive and others' ability to thrive are not in opposition to each other.
Yeah.
And that is an economic model shift, right? It is a worldview shift. And we could do another show just focused on these topics.
That's exactly what I was going to suggest. Is I think we're going from the micro to the macro.
But here's where we'll tie them together.
Yeah.
We live in a time when there is more at stake than there has ever been. Where because of the magnitude of our technology, we can all affect more than anyone has ever been able to affect. Gandhi couldn't put things on YouTube and get virality, right? And so we have the potential to affect things in a way that it could actually contribute to moving in the direction of humans not continuing or a higher quality of life than anyone has ever been able to realize emerging. So this is the context for all of us contemplating our becoming. So the being side is I can access the same state of timeless fullness and beauty now that people could in the time of Buddha, right? Because it's eternal, it's timeless. And that can be a place I can access as respite and as fuel to then come in to this actual time, which is very different than the time of Buddha or any other time, and say, my becoming is not to win at a game that is dying, but is to actually try and help change the game. What is my role? What is the role that I could have in self-actualizing in a way that serves not just me, but all life? So I'll just leave that as a thought to tie the micro and the macro.
I like that. That's a purpose worth pursuing. I like that. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for joining us tonight. I think everyone is going to get a lot out of it. Like I said, I'm going to go back, listen again, and make sure I harvest this fully. And I encourage everyone that's listening to this to do the very same. So thank you for joining us, Daniel.
Thanks for having me. Always fun coming and conversing.
Yes.